Hi, I'm Yolanda and this is Speak On. Today we're talking about the facts of life and the birds and the bees. Today we're talking about sex education, which was incredibly ropey when I was younger. It's been a hot minute since I was in school, but if there's one thing I remember clearly, it's that sex education in British schools was a bit shit. And it let teenagers down. We learnt about our growing bodies and periods. Yes, I whispered the word periods because that's what my teacher that taught me about periods did. We learnt how babies were made, but the whole thing was kind of glossed over. It was taught by quite old teachers. It's not their fault they're old, but it was awkward. And they were far too scared to say the words, and they were just out of touch with current times. Despite talking about sex in the limited way that we did, well, maybe not even despite it, because of that, STIs, misinformation and teenage pregnancy rates were really high. So being the annoyingly proactive person I was at the time, I booked in a meeting with the department that taught sex education in schools in the area I grew up in. I'm not saying that at 19 I had the best approach, but I was a youth worker, and also being young, I suggested working together on updated approaches. But instead of being met with open arms and joy that a young person wants to be actively involved, I was met with hostility that I dared critique how it was taught. Some things have definitely improved though, because since 1999, conception rates for women aged 18 years have decreased by 62.7%. The continued decrease in conception rates is the longest since periods began in 1969. Now again, this shows another step in the right direction, but we know sex education isn't just about pregnancy, as young people aged 15 to 24 are more likely to be diagnosed with an STI than people over the age of 25. Relationships and sex education is now compulsory in schools, but the course's content is left to head teachers and governors, with the Department for Education only offering guidance, which means that young people's sex education is at the mercy of religious beliefs, personal beliefs, prejudice, and hand-wringing morality politics. We know that a school isn't the only place to learn about relationships and sex education. We learn about relationships from our parents, which, for some, can be a tad dysfunctional. Some could be learning from a dad like TI, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. And for some, porn could be the only reference point they have. Yikes. So despite some progress, there's still some work to do. I've invited some much younger guests who have far clearer memories of school than I do to talk about the state of sex education today. Joining me are the hosts of Sextras podcast, Honey and Maria. Welcome, Honey and Maria. Thank you for joining me.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for joining me. How are you both doing at the moment with all things 2021?
It's not the highlight of my life, I have to be honest, but like doing okay considering the circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love being inside, so technically I haven't been struggling that much, but I mean it's getting kind of rough. So yeah,
lockdown suits Maria perfectly.
Wait, you love being inside? You're fine, just kind of chilling in and
I love being
quiet.
alone and inside, so it's kind of my
this
my
is the
vibe,
time when
but
introverts have thrived.
exactly
Yeah, for sure. We did an episode on how COVID has affected us, and we were like, how has it changed our lives? And we were like, not really that much, to be honest. Like, it's kind of bad, but...
Well, you know what? It's fine. I get it. My friends that are extroverts are really struggling, and people that are introverts are like into their own. I'm ambivert, so some of it, sometimes it's more that I'm just bored. It's not so much that I'm isolated or anything else. I'm like, I just want to go out. I just want to go to a bar.
Yes.
And I'm very excited about everything reopening, and just along with my fellow annoying North Londoners just descending on Shoreditch and ruining it when everything's open again.
Shoreditch is such an amazing place. I wish I lived there. I'm so jealous.
It's like I don't live very far away, but when they did the government announcement about, okay, everything's going to be open, and they started giving some approximate dates, we'll call them, Shoreditch was like number 10 trending on Twitter like 2 hours later, just because everyone was just saying, I can't wait to go to Shoreditch, like it's some amazing destination.
I went there 3 times when everything opened.
It's like, I spend stupid amounts of time in Shoreditch House. So for me, I'm just like, there's one place I'm going to go to. I'm going to go to the pool and I'm not going to leave.
So
I'll just be there for the rest of the year. That's it. That's my plan.
My aunt always goes to White City House, and she's like, we always tease her because she like misses it so much because she spends so much time there.
Look, I feel the same way as her, right? We should be, maybe I should start a support group.
Just for
me
people
and
that
your aunt.
miss the Soho House.
Exactly. And other members just rocking in a corner, making our own homemade rubbish drinks. It's not the same. It's just not the same. So anyway, let's talk about sex education.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with Maria. What was your sex education experience like in school?
So I lived in Mexico until I was 10, and I went to Catholic school. So there it was like very much just, they stuck to just like the sperm swims to the egg and that's that. But I just kind of thought that it was like a naked hug and that it was still like optional and that God would come and like you could get married and then you would pray to God and the God would give you the baby after you did the naked hug, like the sperm thing would happen or whatever. I don't know. I just didn't really have a very clear image. But I guess I was quite young, so I don't know. No one really does, I guess. And then in London, like at my school, I guess we had kind of like a lot of people, like the PSHE talks. Mm-hmm. Once a term or whenever, once a term every like 2 or 3 years, something like that. It was like 2 talks in the whole of the school or whatever. And then one was like quite vaguely about like puberty and periods and all of that. And that was like boys and girls separated. And then the other one that we had a couple years later, if I remember correctly, it was more like about STDs and the law and that kind of shit. So it was kind of staying to like the practical, like the medical and like law and kind of what would happen in terms of those things, rather than, I don't remember there being that much focus on relationships and things like that. I don't know, Hun, if you remember, because we went to the same school, so I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
More.
No, there definitely wasn't that much emphasis on relationships.
I mean, everything that you've listed is more than what I learned.
Oh, wow.
So I was like,
really?
oh, wow. I was like, oh, yeah. In my head, I was like, oh, wow, that's so much information. Oh, yeah, it really was.
Wow.
I went to Catholic schools as well. So obviously there is that kind of constraint of religion, not so much set down by the school, but I think you could definitely see where some teachers weren't as comfortable talking about these things, despite the fact that a lot of them had kids, which is wild. So it's like, so at some point, guys, somebody let somebody put something in, but they still couldn't quite, they still weren't okay with it. It was really weird. So it's great to hear that you talked about even as much as you talked about.
Yeah.
As well, yeah. Because I got all my sex education, anything additional came from the fact that I went to youth club and I was part of young youth organisations, and there were quite a few independent organisations filling in those gaps because it just really wasn't very good in schools. So I'm glad to know that that's changed a lot in 20 years. Is it about 20 years? Yeah, more years. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So what do you think, because I mean you were at school a minute ago, so you'll remember this slightly more clearly, and you may have younger siblings or know young people and the kind of process they're going through now. What do you think that the sex education curriculum gets right at the moment?
I think it's pretty good at the medical side, as Maria was saying. Like, we definitely covered a lot to do with the hormonal aspects of periods and the whole process of getting pregnant and the sperm swimming to the egg and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't think that's very helpful, but they did at least get that right. Like, it's good to have that knowledge. And then the law stuff, the legal stuff to do with whether it's legal to send nudes underage, they definitely covered a lot of that, and to do with STDs, as Maria was saying. I think all those things are good in theory. However, I'm not really sure if they translated enough in practice. So yeah, I'll give them credit for that, to be fair.
Yeah.
I suppose those legalities didn't exist when I was younger, so it wasn't that wasn't covered at all. So was like the age of consent and all that covered quite extensively, or was it just touched on? I'll direct that towards Maria.
I remember in one of the talks, the lady kept going on about how like the age of consent, and then she told us this story about this guy that like went to a club and he slept with this underage girl, and then it turned into this whole legal thing. And you know how they tell you like the worst case scenario story kind of thing. And I remember they told us about the story about like sleeping with an underage person and sending nudes, and so they like sent like underage pornography. So they did talk about that, but I do remember distinctly, like I think they told the stories and then told us like why that was like against the law, and then how like these people that committed these horrible like seemingly really like innocent acts, then it became bad. Which seems like a really weird way to frame it. I think they should have just framed it as like, if you actually like do the wrong thing, you know, they kind of try to frame it as like the person didn't know that they were like sleeping with the underage kid and this is how it could go wrong. I feel like that's making it sound like don't have sex, otherwise you will probably fuck it up and go to jail.
Yeah.
You'll accidentally sleep with someone underage.
And there are so many ways to be clear about that as well. That's interesting because I think when again, it was something that wasn't around, and I've got I'm the eldest of 6, and my youngest sibling is 18. So there's a huge age gap between the lot of us. So I've seen bits of it change over time. And so it's that introduction of everything about consent and things that go wrong. It's because when I was younger, so much of that was quite normalized. So I can imagine then once they started introducing it, they, instead of just going straight for here's what can happen, don't do it, or like just making it really clear. I wonder if it's because people are still negotiating with it in their minds because it was so normalized for particular generations.
Yeah, probably.
I was thinking like a really helpful way of doing it, like looking at consent, would be if they kind of did it step by step, like setting boundaries and like saying no within like just relationships before even bringing it into like the sex world. And then kind of if you have those building blocks, like you can build onto the whole like concept of consent in terms of like actually saying no to sex. And like, you know what I'm like, if you build it from the start, it can actually be quite effective. But I think the way that it kind of started happening was like they were like, okay, we need to talk about consent. So then they just started like shooting out, okay, you can say no to sex, like you should say no to this and no to that, rather than kind of explaining like why you would actually want to say no and like in what positions like that you might feel uncomfortable. Like it's not that sex is bad and you always have to say no and all of those things. It's just that I don't know, I think that it got a bit scary, so then it got all kind of knocked down rather than making sure that it's all what's that word, all consistent like throughout the education.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, of course, because all these things are, especially when you are navigating relationships at any point, it's about communication and discussion and setting those boundaries in regardless of what aspect of relationships. That makes so much sense. That's surprising they didn't do that, but yeah. What's your take?
And we all know how to set boundaries. You learn from such a young age. It is just inherent in us as human beings. But then for some reason when sex is introduced, it's like a whole different story, because I think there's so much fear mongering around what you can say yes to or what you should say yes to, whatever that means. And yeah, it just gets lost in translation. It's really weird.
It really does. And it's really interesting what you were saying about we learn to set boundaries, and we do in some areas of our life. It's very, very easy. Like, no, I don't want to eat that. It's like, I do not like that thing. And so it's so easy. But when it does come to that, it's so murky. And I think it's been interesting growing up and seeing the changes in the 80s, the 90s, the noughties until now. A lot of it is like night and day. In terms of how women set boundaries and what women can say, and the things that were normalized when I was younger that were wildly inappropriate, and you at best we were allowed to feel uncomfortable and keep it to ourselves. Whereas now I love that younger generations are being taught to, and they've got their voice, and they're just like, no, nah, I'm all right, thanks. And I love that.
Yeah. I remember they used the phrase grey areas so much when they were talking about consent, and that used to piss me off so much because I'm like, what does that actually mean? That doesn't mean anything to me. Like, and now looking back on it, it makes even less sense because I'm like, well, that we have conversations about this all the time between us on the podcast and just in general life about all the ways that we end up saying yes to things that we know in ourselves that we don't want to say yes to, but they don't talk about those circumstances. And if they did that, our lives would be so much better. I wish they did that.
Yeah. It makes so much more sense if that was the case. And yeah, I think that's such a good point. And it's honestly, when I'm hearing you talking about it, it's just making me think, oh my God, I know there were so many bits that are missing from when I was at school, but just in terms of that whole setting boundaries and how I've had to learn that throughout my life in a really particular way, because it was just, truly, okay, here's an example, and it wasn't even hideously long ago. I worked at a place and we had a meeting, and I had to leave the meeting to do something else. And one of my team members, who was a lot younger, was in that meeting, and a much older guy who was the head of a company genuinely made a comment about her body in that meeting. And I wasn't there to be able to stop it. But another, the CEO of the company was older than me again. And she just laughed it off. And when my younger team member said, I felt really uncomfortable, I didn't want to stay, and she expressed her discomfort and how upset she was, I then escalated it to the CEO and talked about it in the team. And she was like, oh, it's no big deal. It's just this, it's just that. And I was like, absolutely not. None of this is okay. But it's really difficult conversation to have. And I can imagine it must be quite difficult having these subjects taught by people who were born or have lived in the grey areas, so they're not going to be particularly good, because she didn't understand at all why I was fuming about how inappropriate it was and how upset my team member was. So that must be quite difficult. So what age were the teachers that taught you to sex education? Because you're at the same school. Was it the same teachers? I'll go to Maria for that one.
At our school, they want teachers. They would be like random sort of PSHE people. So we didn't actually know them previously or anything, but they weren't that old. They were just like middle aged, like a little older than our parents, I would say. Okay, yeah, that's interesting from my memory. But yeah, but I remember that my sister actually told me this, that she had one of her talks recently, one of the sex talks, and that the talkers themselves, like, there was a bit that they could ask questions, and someone asked like about female masturbation, and then the like woman that was giving the talk literally was like, oh, it's just like a little private time or something like that. She said something like so vague, like she used one of the, like, you know, instead of saying vagina, you say something like cutesy, like my little kooky or whatever. Like she said something like cute to, like, instead of saying like the words, like the actual words for masturbation and like clit and like, I don't know, apparently she told me, and which is just like really weird. Like, if the actual people that are teaching you the things like are uncomfortable saying the language, like obviously you're gonna be uncomfortable saying it too.
That's so weird.
But sorry, that wasn't that related to the question you asked me, but it made me think because I pictured the woman.
Well, that leads on really well to my next question, because I was going to ask, what is missing from sex education? And the perfect example is people not using the correct words. So honey, what else do you think is missing from sex education?
I have such a long list.
It's all right, go for it.
Well, kind of leading on from what Maria was saying, they don't really talk at all about female pleasure, so that's obviously a massive one. Masturbation, I feel like they talk about masturbation in terms of guys, but
right,
for girls they don't really mention it, at least in my memory. They never really said anything about it, and I obviously knew where the clitoris was, like, on my body, because we learned that in science, but I don't remember learning, oh, this is Like, this is what it does. This is why it's so good.
Yeah, exactly. This is the best bit of your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember really like learning about the clit in sex ed. Like they didn't really tell us about it, which is such a weird thing to leave out. Like it's kind of the whole show.
We definitely learnt about like the tip of the dick as well. So
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's just, and I think I learnt the scientific part from a man. So that was probably his area of expertise. Also, we had a theory that he was a virgin, so I don't know how much of an expert he was on that area, but yeah, so that's definitely the first thing, is just pleasure overall. I think it gets reduced way too much to just like, these are your bodily functions, this is what happens when you put a penis inside a vagina, instead of sex should just be fun. So that's problem number one. And then secondly, I think a massive one is the grey areas I was saying, and around consent. I don't think they cover it in enough detail. I think the main overall problem with sex education is they kind of just spurt all this information at you in a very, I don't know, like surgical way, especially with STDs and that kind of thing. I remember they showed us all these pictures of when stuff like chlamydia gets to like its worst stage.
Oh my god! Actually, I wanted to say something about. I wanted to say something about the STD pictures. I remember them showing us all these like horrible pictures of like worst case scenario of STDs kind of things. And like when I went to uni, I got chlamydia 3 times. So clearly that did nothing to me. And I was thinking like, surely like that's quite a good approach. Like, you know, it scares you, blah, blah, blah. But I think like showing like the worst case scenario pictures, it kind of makes it into this thing of like, oh, that's the kind of thing like, but it wouldn't happen to me. So then it makes it even more like, oh, it's not going to happen to me, so whatever. So I think like that's kind of the reason that I was like, oh, I don't give a fuck. And then I was like, it's not going to happen to me. And then it happened to me, you know? So I think it just made it like, this can literally happen to you. And it's like, and just tell the truth. Like, it's not going to kill you. You can just take some pills and like it's going to go away. It's not nice to have it though.
Yeah.
Like taking the pills is horrible. Like they should just tell people the truth, not like try to make it into like this horrible thing or this like super romanticized thing of like, it's like this showing of love and whatever, because it doesn't have to be that, and it doesn't have to be the like super scientific, you know, just tell the truth.
And I think the way they did it with us as well is like showing all those pictures, it created so much shame around it. I also got chlamydia while I was still at school, and when I found out, I cried. Like, I literally sobbed because I was like, what's gonna happen to me? I'm so scared.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, honey, calm down, it's not that big of a deal. But I really thought it was such a horrible thing, because you internalize all this shame from it in those, if that's how you're taught at school, because you just think, oh my god, I'm gonna get some like yellow infection on my vagina, like what's gonna happen to me? So
that's such a good point, because that's such a good point. It's like you make it sound like the most extreme thing that can happen, and then you just kind of you don't even become risk averse. You think it just seems wild. Whereas I've had chlamydia. My friends have had chlamydia.
Who hasn't
like
had
literally
chlamydia?
At this point, I think the stat for it is incredible. It's really high how many people have had it. And I do know that the main thing I suppose they should have told you is, look, you can get it. It's more common than you think. And basically, if you just want to make sure if you get it sorted out straight away so it doesn't escalate.
Yeah.
That's it. Thumbs up.
Exactly.
Crack on.
And
Yeah.
normalize getting tested as well. Like, obviously you don't want to try to get an STD. No one's trying to get one. But if you do, then, or even if you're just having sex, you should go get tested, because then you'll find out. Like, I know people our age that have never gotten tested.
That is insane.
Yeah.
Why?
My boyfriend's never been tested.
What?
So,
That's because
I could be 2 years deep into undetected chlamydia and I don't even know it.
Oh my god. Well, that was one of the stats actually said how much of a decrease in testing there's been in more recent years. And but then when people are getting diagnosed, and then the diagnoses have gone up. Yeah, so there's been a decrease in people just even turning up to take the test. But more people are getting it. And then one of the stats I saw as well is something like women are more likely to have it because it's showing that men are having a lot of partners. Because that's how I got it.
Yeah.
Cheating, I don't recommend it. So so yes, that's when I've got it. It's because something else has happened that someone else has done, and I've ended up paying forfeit. But again, it was the first time I was like, oh no, I was so, like you were saying, I was like, really, I was a bit shocked, I was a bit upset, I was a bit sad. Then I was like, no, it's all right, it's fine. And my friends are like, it's really not a big deal.
Because you think it means something about who you are as a person, like it means that you're a slut or something. But I literally got it from one of the first people that I ever slept with, so obviously I wasn't a slut. Like I was young at the time, and we were all young at the time when we got it, so
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's no one wants it to be a rite of passage, but it kind of is at some point. This is what university will do, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think if in sex education, like, people just sort of said the things that we were just saying, like, just be a little bit more careful, realistically, like, this is what it is. I don't know, if people were just a little bit more honest about what, like, things around sex are actually like, rather than making it out to be this huge thing or this scary thing or this shameful thing, then I feel like less people would get chlamydia, because people would just be a little bit more smart about it.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Or just get it and then you'll get smart about it.
Yeah.
Either way, it's like
Yeah. But everyone knows that kids are, like, desperate for sex education. That's why the show Sex Education has been so popular. And they crave the honesty and the knowledge about it, because they want to have those skills in their lives. And that's why it's so important to talk about it. And they're trying. I appreciate they're trying, but a lot of things they need to improve on.
Absolutely. And I feel like the blueprint was there, and the questions have been asked since I was younger. So it's wild that it's taken almost 20 years to even get to where we are now, and it's still lacking, because, like you were saying, it's just being honest. And I remember when I was younger and I went to those nurses and said, I really want to work with you on sex education and making it more accessible and easier in schools, and I was part of other organisations that were doing this, and they just took it as critique. And it's like, it's not about critique. This isn't about you or your vagina, hun. This is about everyone else's and everyone else's lives, and, you know, their sex life, their pleasure, everything. It just wasn't. They just didn't. It was just really not well received at all. It just kind of, that was it. It kind of fell flat on its face at that point. But everything you're saying were things I asked then when I was younger, because there was just no information. And, you know, without information, then you're I suppose you're in more of a position of danger as well, when you just don't know what's going on. And one of the things you brought up there, which is I really want to talk about this, and I've talked about this on previous podcasts as well. So when it comes to all things sex ed, we learn too much about the penis. Too much about the penis. This bit's sensitive. Sure. This is what it is. This is what masturbation is. And here's where babies come from. That's pretty much what it was like for women. This is where you'll shoot out a kid, and then, you know, therefore validate your existence on this planet. And this is where you'll bleed from. There wasn't much of that information. And when it came to, like, female pleasure and masturbation, there was just nothing. There was no information. I had to learn about that over time, and learn about that from bloody TV shows. Things. And there was a lot more magazines around when I was younger. I appreciate a lot of them are in liquidation now. They don't exist anymore. They folded. R.I.P. magazines. But
I love a good magazine.
Oh man, there was more magazine used to be one of the ones that had so much sex information, and as a result, some schools banned girls from reading it. And it was actually a brilliant magazine. They had this thing. They had the Sex Olympics, which was all these different sexual positions you could try. It had agony aunts, and they were agony aunts back then, but answering all your questions about sex. And it was just really frank, alongside, you know, here's how to do your hair, the face shape for a fringe,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But that was, it was so disembodied. And I know that recently Zoella will be removed, I should say, from the GCSE Media Studies course list or something, because she created content about sex toys, and they think that her as an entity is now inappropriate for GCSE age. What are your thoughts on the school, the sex education curriculum missing out female masturbation, and what are your thoughts on removing Zoella from the media studies thing? So weird. I'll go to Honey first.
We were talking about this, I think, literally yesterday, about how she got removed from the curriculum, and it's just so ridiculous. So that's kind of all it comes down to, really, is it's just so petty. Just let her talk about what she wants to talk about. She's proven herself enough. She's been doing her job for like 10 years, like as long as I can remember. So just leave her alone, whatever, it's fine. And then the whole thing with female pleasure and just the language we use to talk about masturbation and body parts, even if it is the pure scientific analysis of sexuality or whatever, is, if you really break it down, what do those messages show girls? This part of your body is just there so you can have children. So immediately they're going to think, okay, my purpose is to have children. And then for men, the tip of their dick is for pleasure. So what does that teach boys? They have to go out and look for pleasure. So, and then we wonder why men are like constantly seeking this thing and trying to fulfill masculinity, and then women are constantly trying to fulfill this idea of femininity. And it just essentializes the two things. Also, not to mention the fact that it just completely ignores anything outside of those two genders. Another thing which I think is left off the curriculum, along with other sexual orientations, but that's besides the point. Yeah, it just teaches all these harmful and such outdated ideas of what men and women are and what their bodies are there for, and I hate it. I really hate it.
What do you think about it, Maria?
Well, I think mainly like taking Zoella out of the curriculum literally because she is promoting a sex toy or talking about sex in any way is literally just directly like telling young girls that it's like bad or shameful in some kind of way, and boys or whatever, like telling everyone is kind of giving that message. So obviously I think it's a bit weird, because also it's like she's a grown woman.
She's 30.
It's obviously, like, she has sex. It's like a normal part of life. It's so weird to be sort of like shamed or taken out of something literally for talking about the fact that you have sex, or that sex can be pleasurable for a woman. And that, like you can see, like, why do you... And then we wonder why girls are so, like, don't think about their pleasure, and why sex so much of the time becomes this whole, like, for the guy to come, and, like, when the guy comes, it's over, and who cares about the girl? Because we are literally being told to not talk about female pleasure, in not being taught it, and then in, like, literally being shamed for talking about it, or excluded for talking about it. And all those things just send messages that perpetuate this whole idea. And then young girls just like go on to be like ashamed and not want to, like, not care about their pleasure, and it's kind of sad.
It really is. It really is. I feel like they're missing out. I remember when I was at university, and when a lot of us, we'd go home actually quite a lot on the weekends, weirdly, even though we're at uni, because we weren't that far away from where we all lived. And we would go home to go and see our boyfriends and everything else, because we left them all back in our hometowns. And we'd go home, then of course then the whole weekend is hanging out with your mates, drinking and just having sex. That's it. And then you go back to uni, where you just hang out with your mates, drink, but then you learn as well. So we'd go back, and then on Sunday night we'd all meet and have a big old chat about the weekend, which was mainly just talking about what the hell we did and how much sex we'd had. And I remember sitting in one of my friend's rooms with one of her housemates, and she'd been with her boyfriend since she was quite young, and she never used to say anything, and then one day she was like, when I have sex with my boyfriend, it's not like anything how you guys describe. And we were like, what? We were taken aback. And we, at that point, really didn't know we don't know what we know now. Honestly, it just gets better with age. But when we were younger, and we were like, what? And we had to sit down and talk to her about these things because she didn't have friends that talked about sex. She hadn't learned about particular things. And because she wasn't having that conversation and had internalized a lot of that nonsense from school, she was just there. She was just happy to be there, I guess, when she was having sex. She was just happy to be included, I think. Yeah. I don't know that she was getting anything else from it until we spoke to her about it, and then RIP that relationship.
Oh God.
Because that didn't last that much longer after that, because she realised that maybe she could have been having a better time. So I hope she's having an amazing time now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So what was it like for you guys? Do you think that discussing it with your friends and everything else has just made the whole thing better?
Yes, 100%. And also, it's not just about sexual pleasure as well. As what I want to say is, obviously you should be open with your friends and people you're close to about anything, but being able to express your needs in sex is just such a small part of the bigger picture as well. Like, if you can express your sexual needs, you can express your needs for other things in life, and just your desire to live a happy and pleasurable life overall. It's not just about sex. It's about teaching girls that they're not just there to be mothers and to be wives. They're there as individuals, and they can do whatever they want to do and have their own desires and their own dreams. And yeah, talking about it with Maria and with all our friends on the podcast has been amazing, because I feel like we were already pretty open anyway, but we've definitely learned so much about ourselves in the process as well, and about each other. So yeah, it only helps. It can only help, really.
Yeah.
Is it like a really good bonding experience, Maria?
Most of what I know and learnt about sex, I feel, is from hearing like my friends talk, because I don't know, I remember like a lot of the shit I learned because I slept with a girl before I ever slept with a guy. So then like a lot of the shit about guys and like sleeping with guys and stuff is just from stuff that I'd heard like other friends say, that like about her sex life and stuff like that. So I think that's huge. And like so many things that my sister has said to me is like, just like, I'm so glad that I have you, because otherwise like I would not know half of this shit that like my friends don't know and things like that. I don't know, I think a huge thing is like talking to friends, and it definitely like bonds people. You like learn a lot, and it can become a really like secretive thing, because then like people don't really like sometimes make it seem like talking about your sex life is like rude to your partner, or like it's not okay, or it's like a private thing. But like you said, your friend like literally would have never known how much shit was missing. And my mum even says to me, like, since we started the podcast, the amount of times that my mum has been like, I literally didn't even know that was a thing. Like, I've learnt so much. And she's in her 50s and like been married for like more than half her life, and she still doesn't know those things. It's kind of crazy.
That is crazy. It's so interesting. I was having conversations with some of my friends. We're all this is like our 40th year, so there's lots of, I mean, thank God we'll be out of anything by the time it's my 40th. I don't care about theirs so much, but this during lockdown, I've been send presents to my friends, because you know we have to get through all this somehow. And so a few of them I've sent sex toys to. Some of them, they're fine, they're used to it, they're like, brilliant, add this to my collection. But some of them are like, whoa what is this? And because there's a bunch of us that talk about sex all the time, and I've been getting them involved in our conversations, and it's always, it never ceases to amaze me how much people don't know about things. And because I've got two of my friends are porn stars, so Julie, we have the most amazing conversations, and there's so much stuff I learn from them all the time, and that's what makes me so much more open about talking about these things is like, when you've seen your friend's vaginas that much, and we've talked about all these things, it's so much easier to continue that conversation. But yeah, some people, they don't even realize. And like you were saying, it's not just about pleasure. It's about, I suppose it's about confidence. It's about kind of building that, it's like self-love. All of that stuff is important, what it brings to wider aspects of your life, but also about connection in relationships as well. That isn't covered at all. Yeah. But we now know that relationships and sex education, or RSE as it's going to be called or is called, is now compulsory in schools. So I touched on it a little bit in the intro. What are your thoughts on this? Because as I said as well, the actual content is going to be set by head teachers and school governors as opposed to the Department for Education. I just need to know all your thoughts on this. I'm going to go to Maria first because she's pulling a real face about it. And then we'll go to Honey.
I was reading the thing, like the sort of guidelines and stuff, and all of it just keeps saying like, you can consult with the parents and like see what they think and all of that and all of this stuff. And it's just kind of like, what? I'm sorry. Like, I get that. I think that, like, obviously education about relationships and sex and all of that, like, your parents are going to have to be hands-on, and like your parents should also like teach you those things, and obviously you learn those things from your parents. But there's like sort of like a basic level of education and like knowledge that you should receive and know that shouldn't really like be up to your parents or like whatever the head teacher thinks or whatever sort of like the community vibe is saying, because like I don't know, I think what we're forgetting is like it's important information that everyone sort of needs to know. And like in the basis that I was reading it is like basic things about like family relationships and like friendships, romantic relationships, and like just about like respecting people and learning about how families can look different and all of these things that I feel like everyone should just sort of know. And I think that if it's coming under the influence of like religion, just general personal preferences and things like that, it's like not everyone is getting basic knowledge that everyone deserves to get in the same way that everyone deserves to sort of like know what 2 + 2 is. You know what I mean? I don't know, that's my personal opinion. And then I was like reading about what like the Christian syllabus is, or like I don't know, when it gets into like certain religions and like what they actually have to include, and it's so vague. It's literally like it's written so you basically can include like as little or as much as possible, so it's like in guidelines with the Christian lifestyle too, which oh god, I just don't really understand it because it's so contradictory in itself, like what it says that people should learn and what is up to your interpretation. It's all very wishy-washy, and I think it was like it's the right sentiment making it compulsory, but I don't think that they sort of like did all the things that they should have done to ensure that everyone's getting the right like information.
It's like a wishy-washy step in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and what do you think of it, Honey?
Well, kind of building on what Maria says is the whole idea of the parents' involvement in it. It's so weird. Everything I was reading was saying they're trying to build on what parents teach their children, but they're assuming that all parents teach their children the same thing, which we know for a fact is absolutely not true. So many parents do not say anything to their children, and I'm so lucky that my mum told me what sex was when I was like 8. I remember exactly what happened. I remember where we were and what she said and everything, and I remember what she's told me from then on as well. But I know so many girls don't even know what a period is. We had a girl, a friend of ours, when we were 13, thought you only got your period in the spring.
That'd be really useful though.
Yeah. Like, I wish it was like that, but I had to let her down gently and be like, oh, no, sorry to let you down. Yeah, just the idea that we're building on whatever parents may or may not have taught their children. Like, imagine that was our approach to the rest of education. Imagine we were like, okay, we're going to teach you geography based on what your parents have already taught you. Like, where would you even begin? It's kind of already from the start sending the message that this education is either not as important as the other aspects of education, or there's some inherent shame in it. And then the fact that your parents can be like, okay, well, actually, no, I don't want my kid to do that. What do you think the kid's gonna want to do after that? You're just gonna turn around and like search sex on the internet, and guess what's gonna come up? Porn. Like, is that a better alternative? No, it's not. It just I love that they've tried to include relationships, because that wasn't a thing at all when we had sex education, and it took them 20 years to make that change, but that's fine, like from 2000 to 2020. But yeah, I think, as you said, like, it's definitely a step in the right direction, but they're still coming at it from the perspective of not what the kids want to learn and what the kids should learn. Rather, it's like what the parents already have an idea of in their heads, and the governors who are probably the same age as the parents or older. So it's not actually benefiting anyone other than their beliefs.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely, I love the idea of them bringing in and talking about relationships, because that's how you can better have these much clearer conversations about consent and boundaries if you talk about them in the framework of relationships. And like both of you were saying, it's about learning about and normalizing other lifestyles, other people, and learning about that helps you learn about yourself. But one thing that we do know, which has been tried and tested over time and exists, is that the more you tell people they can't do something, the more they're going to do it. The more you make them repress something, the kind of worse it can be. Yeah, I went to a Catholic school. A lot of people had babies. A lot of them. Too many of them. So many of my friends had kids in school. And it's because we have this thing of repression and this thing of, it's you save it for them. And we're not going to give you any information. Oh, surprise! You have a baby now. Oh, well. So it's because people aren't getting the information. Then they're going to go and do it, and they're going to make mistakes that are so easily avoidable. But also, if you have parents that are very overzealous, the one thing that an overzealous parent has is a habitual liar for a child. They do not know what they're doing, and they don't know what they've created. It's going to create that same kind of thing with sex, isn't it?
Yeah. And honestly, I really, really strongly believe that relationship, like RSE, everything that's encompassed by that, is pretty much the most important thing you're going to learn in school, in my opinion. Like, that's the thing that's going to influence your life the most, like more than any other subject. More than maths. No one cares about maths. Maybe, I don't know if it's more than English and like basic literacy, but really strongly, like, that is the most important thing that you will get hung up on for your whole life if you have bad relationships and you have bad sexual experiences.
Yeah, and it's imperative that you're taught it by an external party, because everything we learn about attachment and relationships comes from our experience from our parents and taught by our family and taught we see around it. And look, no shade to my parents, I love you all, but up until like a certain point, your relationships were shit. So, and there were some interesting lessons I learned from that, but you don't learn them until you're old enough to process them. And also, once I'd repeated a few cycles 75 times, then therapy makes you realize, oh no, that shit was janky, and I don't want to do that again. Oh, this is where I learned it. Okay. But whereas if you were presented it in school in a particular way, my God, just think about how much time you'd save.
Yeah.
Everyone would be so much happier.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what's missing. We talked about the few things that are good. What are the dangers of sex education not being taught properly? I'm going to go to Maria for that one.
Well, I think as I was saying before, like enforcing this sort of idea of shame and fear and like badness around sex, or wrongness, I guess, to especially for young girls. Obviously, like it kind of applies to everyone because it also impacts like the way that men look at sex, but I think it's mainly brings up shame and fear around sex and makes it really hard for people to have like a healthy relationship with sex. And realistically, sex is like quite a big part of life, even though it's quite a taboo thing to speak about or uncomfortable, and even though we only get 1 or 2 little PSHE talks the whole time we're at school, it actually kind of like rules a lot of shit in life. I just think it would make people feel a lot more prepared to go into like adult relationships, and that includes sex. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I completely got what you're saying, because it's the point you made there, which is the best point, is that so much of our lives, unless you are taking, unless you're taking a vow of abstinence, all of this stuff governs so much of your life. The relationships you go into can govern your work life, your personal life, your self-esteem, your finances. So many things are hinged and center around the relationships that we have: interpersonal relationships, casual, like proper intimate relationships, all of that stuff. And sex is something that a lot of people spend a lot of time doing, and it's important to learn about sex and intimacy and consent and communication and how we have all those things, because outside of work and outside of everything else, that is what we're going to. And even if you're like single or you've been single for a long time, there's still an element of understanding that and understanding yourself. So I completely get what you're saying. It's so much bigger. And I think that's what you were just like, where can I find the words? It's sex and relationships are kind of everything. Yeah. Aren't they? So yeah. What do you think about that, honey?
Absolutely, everything that you guys said is just so much bigger than sex and relationships. I mean, bigger than sex, relationships are basically everything, and that is something that gets honed into so much when you're going through the job application process, the university process, any interview. Like, make sure that you establish a good relationship with the interviewer and you make it seem like you're a nice person to be around. But then where does that go with sex and relationships? And it's just because we have all these outdated ideas of what sex is and what age is appropriate for people to start learning about sex. Kids really do not care. It's not going to traumatize them to learn about sex. What's going to traumatize them is to not learn about sex and have something horrible happen to them because they didn't even have the ability to recognize that that wasn't something that should be happening to them in the first place. So yeah, there's a limitless amount of dangers, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something you touched on earlier that is really stuck with me. And I know I've mentioned it already, but the relationship with yourself and what that teaches you about yourself, I think that's really key, because all of that, I think you made the point of saying, well, if you're just taught as a woman that all this is about reproduction and it's about nothing else, it also kind of really underpins the patriarchy, doesn't it? And we need to smash enough of that shit already. So it's exhausting. It's exhausting. So it underpins that. And also what it does to boys and to men is thinking that everything must be guided by their dick, and then if it isn't, then it's then what are they doing? What are they worth? Where does that put their self-worth as well, and what they understand relationships to be, and then how they struggle, even at this age, to have adult relationships. It's like it's a never-ending battle. I promise. But they struggle because there are these little bits of foundation that just aren't there, that are put in place for women at particular ages through, I don't know, magazines and other things that we learn, and books and kind of external forces, and just just stereotypes. But yeah, I think but the points that you've both raised have really just made me think so differently about this subject.
I'm so glad.
So we talked about the dangers of sex education not being taught properly. So now I want to know from both of you, how do you think it should be done? And now I'm just going to sit back and listen because I'm sure you've got lots of ideas. I'm going to go to Honey first, and then Maria, you pick up after.
Well, I think there should definitely be, from a young age, introducing it. So obviously they've talked about in primary school the whole idea of health and relationships and boundary setting. But as we were saying, reading the guidelines, they are quite vague and wishy-washy. So I really wish they would put more solid things in place that you just have to learn about. And if the parents have a problem with it, then I kind of hate to say it, but like that's their problem. And we obviously have to be respectful of people's cultural and religious views, but nothing is really going to change in terms of sexual violence or your relationships with anyone unless it's just taught from a young age and it's normalized and there's no shame around it. And then you have all of these building blocks to go through the rest of your life with, and that has to go with teachers who don't feel shame about it, or they're not scared of saying the word vagina, you know. Especially if they say the word penis and not the word vagina, that's a massive issue. So yeah, I just wish that all of these things were talked about more, and children, even if they're not going to get the education at school, they have these options for where to look that aren't just porn or hearing about it from their friends, because we've obviously said that talking to your friends about it is so important, but if your friends aren't educated about it, then it's not really going to be a productive thing for any of you from a young age. So just, even if you just had that one friend that was super educated about it and they could teach you, we need that one friend to have had that background of good education. So I don't know, I have high hopes for the future.
I think they should take a way more sort of like getting all the info out there approach, just like kind of telling it like it is. I think it's made into a really like moral, or not, maybe not moral, but like it's so taboo that it's like it's seen you have to be so careful around it, and like, oh, if we say the wrong thing, like it could fuck everything up and whatever. But I think if you just give the information that needs to be given, as in, oh, like sex is not just to reproduce, it can also be pleasurable, but also you should be careful because it will get you pregnant if you do that, like, you know, like that kind of does happen with sex, so you should be careful. Like, just kind of give people all the actual information rather than making it, is it okay, or like, you should wait until the perfect moment or whatever. I don't know, it's like you shouldn't really be like telling people what to do. It's just like the information of what can happen and like what the options are, and then just let people like make up their own minds, and not make it into this huge thing that there's like 2 talks in the year, because then it gives sex all this like power of being this uncomfortable, unspoken about thing. Whereas if it's just more introduced into the curriculum, like more regularly, like brought up, and as Honey definitely said, like I agree with the relationships and like learning about that aspect of it. So if that was all just like way more introduced into the curriculum as a regular and like constant thing, that would probably work a lot better than like making it these like 2 standalone instances or whatever that makes it into a huge thing, if that makes sense. I think that would kind of be my way of approaching it, but I also don't even have like the perfect answer. Like, I don't have a way better alternative. I mean, I can bash the sex education system and curriculum all I want, but I don't have like a fix realistically. So
but I think so. What you said, I feel, is realistic. It is just about providing information. There's so much information provided about other things. What both of you said is, well, what if you just gave everybody everything? They had access to everything, because it isn't about opinion, and it isn't about, morality. What even is morality? Like, what the fuck even is that? But because that's just shit dictated by people that have just made up their minds about stuff a long time ago, and that was used to control people. That's what a lot of that stuff is. Much like the myth of virginity. Yeah. Let's just start smashing this shit to pieces and getting rid of it. And with all these fancy words for women will tell you what to do with your uterus. That's kind of what it all is, isn't it? But Yeah, but though I think it makes perfect sense. If you just have all the information, think about how well armed you're going to be. And it isn't like you were saying, Maria, it's not about don't do this and don't do that. It's like, well, this is what this kind of relationship can look like, and this is what this kind of relationship can do.
Exactly.
Like. Here's what some people do, and here's what other people do. It's not telling people what to choose, it's just showing them what exists, which also helps in terms of things like just acceptance of the world around you, just to stop us all being kind of like sitting down hatefully, like, I don't know, bloody smashing our faces against keyboards on Twitter and being shitty to each other as well. We just learnt to accept it and mind our business. Like, how much better would life be if we didn't think we had to comment on everyone else's relationship? Like, we're part of it, we're in it, we've got anything to do it, like we've seen their dick or genitals. It's like none of it's got anything to do with us.
Yeah.
But so I think if it was part of everything, it would make things so much easier and better for younger generations as they got older as well. Think about how much easier it would be to, just in terms of sexuality and gender fluidity, all these things, but everything is attached to opinion, unfortunately, even when it hasn't got anything to do with it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And also, lastly, I was just gonna say, like, I really hope the government put more effort into consulting more progressive people in terms of creating this policy, especially women, because women are the people that kind of are impacted by it the most negatively. So if we encourage women to kind of help create these policies and create what goes into sex education and relationship education rather than these like old men, then it would just be way more progressive, and it's a cycle. So I just wanted to say that. That
is a really good point. We can't just be asking Jacob Rees-Mogg for his opinion.
He probably hasn't had sex in like 10 years.
Literally, he is a caricature from the bloody Victorian age, who hasn't changed his own children's nappy. That whole family are in black and white. There's no colour. It's insane. I don't understand that. It's so weird, and it's so odd, isn't it? The kind of people that are essentially making these decisions and the lives they lead, because everyone makes decisions based on their own experiences and everything else. But for some reason, when it comes to pulling decision makers together, no one remembers that and makes sure that it's inclusive and diverse and representative of anybody else's lifestyle or experience other than their own. And that would be key in this, and I suppose key in making young people feel comfortable as well about themselves and their bodies, and making healthier relationship decisions. I think that's something that people haven't really thought about necessarily when it comes to this. But if you're younger and you could learn what coercive control is, then how much better armed are you? If you can learn about these types of things and how relationships can be used or can be a danger to you, without it kind of making it fear-mongering, but just so people can spot things. It would make a huge difference. So now you told me how you think it should be taught, which I'm here for, by the way. Like, Sextras curriculum 2022. I am absolutely here for. So I actually want to talk a little bit more, like before we go, talk a little bit more about Sextras, because I want to know, why does it exist? Why did you choose it? Whose idea was it? How did you come up with the name? What have we got to look forward to on Sextras? I'll go with Honey first, and then Maria. Both of you can feed off each other. Yeah.
I'm sure we kind of have similar ideas. So I'm pretty sure it was Maria's idea. I'm pretty sure she suggested it first. But it was kind of inspired by the idea that we've always kind of been known as like the open people about sex, like our friendship group, and I feel like we've kind of pushed people's boundaries a bit in terms of talking about sex, and definitely made a few people uncomfortable, but they should be, because not that they should be, but you have to make people uncomfortable so they aren't uncomfortable. If you get me what I'm saying. It was inspired by that, really. And when we went to uni as well, we were just shocked by like how repressed people were and how people were having loads of sex clearly, but they didn't really want to talk about it, and it was kind of shameful. So we were kind of like, okay, we should maybe try and do something about this. Yeah, Maria?
Yeah, well, literally, like, my friends have said about me, just like, oh, literally, you can't have a conversation with Maria and it not turn into a conversation about sex. So it was kind of off that, just wanting to normalize talking about sex as well, and just so we basically have more people that think it's normal, and then everyone can just be talking about sex all the time, because realistically it's like more interesting than other stuff. But yeah, and yeah, we just kind of like want to have a space that we can talk about all the things we basically already talk about anyway, but just like
with other people,
bring more people into the conversation, and yeah, and into like the awareness of it. And into awareness of like things that I think it's stuff that we think only we talk about, because I don't know, sometimes like when my boyfriend, like I'll tell my boyfriend about something like attachment styles or something, and he'll be like, oh, why do you even like think about these things? And it's like, why don't you? And it's, yeah, so it's just basically stuff that we think that everyone should like know about and would make everyone better for it. And yeah, that's kind of the idea of Sextras. And the name, how did we even come up with the name? I think
we had a massive brainstorming session.
Yeah.
But in terms of what we have to look forward to with Sextras, we're doing a kind of series for Women's Month, which we're really excited about. So those will come out in March, and we have countless things going on, so many ideas. We're going to talk about toxic relationships with you, so that's exciting. Yep. And we're going to do a agony aunt style episode soon, so you guys should like follow us to keep an eye out for that. So if you have any queries or you want to get our advice about something, we'll give you our opinions. Yeah, we're pretty excited about that one.
I love it. That sounds great. And I love the idea of the podcast. And like you were saying, if we just normalise talking about these things, then happy days for everyone. But also, why wouldn't you want to be better at sex?
Exactly.
Why wouldn't you? And you can only do that if you know stuff. Because, like I said, it gets better as you get older, as you learn more. It's like considering when I was younger, and I was like, I really liked it when I was younger. I was straight away, I was like, this is for me. This is for me. This is a solid pastime. But then as I got older, I was like, oh, I thought that was good. I had no fucking idea. It's just got better and better. And yeah. And it's like, and then once you learn more about yourself and your body and everything else, I'm just like, I don't even know where I've got to go from here, guys. I'm not going to lie.
That's kind of the thing with the podcast as well, is like we know we still have so much to learn. We feel like we've learned so much in the past 6 months even, so like looking back on what we didn't know when we started the podcast versus what we know now, we kind of just want people to go on that journey with us, like people of a similar age, so they can witness it. I mean, not to sound super cheesy, but
I love it. It's brilliant. It's like I'm like oh man, I'd love to go back and experience some things for the first time again, because the day that you discover it, you're like, oh yeah. This is a great day.
Yeah.
Wicked. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been awesome. Where would you like to be found online? I'll go to Maria.
You can find us on Instagram at Sextras Podcast and on Facebook at Sextras Podcast, or our website, which is www.sextraspodcast.com. Basically, it's just Sextras Podcast everywhere.
Yeah.
And wherever you get your podcast, you can listen to us. So if you liked our voices.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, and have an amazing day.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Speak On. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, co-workers, strangers in the street. To find out more about us, including our upcoming events, head over to Instagram, instagram.com/speakon_. Bye!